Last one? Thank you. I appreciate that. Y'all are so kind. I'm surprised you. I can't believe how many people even realized I was gone.
Oh, we didn't have a drummer, man.
Oh, that's what it was. Yeah. Something didn't sound right.
Yeah, I hear that drum for the last two. It was just off key, you know.
Whatever. It's probably like, why am I enjoying this so? Oh, I know why. Because the drums aren't here.
Ears burning.
Any prayer requests tonight? We'll go ahead and get started with prayer. Okay. Don't forget our pastor and his family, Blake. Okay. Did you say Brother Farron? Brother Farron? Any others? All right. Let's go to the Lord together tonight. Praise your holy name, God. Thank you so much, Jesus, for your mercy, for your grace. Thank you for the word, God. Pray, Lord, that you'll bless us tonight, God, by hearing your word and understanding it, Lord, that we would know you better and we'd be able to draw closer to you, God. Lord, all these requests that were voiced before you, Lord, I pray you would know each one. God, you know who needs comfort, who needs peace, who needs strength, who needs healing, Lord, and I pray these things, God. Lord, that you'd give these to those that are in need, Father. We trust and have faith in you that your hand is on these situations, Lord. We just thank you, God, being our Father, and that we can serve a God like you. Lord, let your hand be on this lesson tonight, Lord. And make us all ready, Lord, to hear your word. Know that we love you, God, and we give you the glory in everything. Praise you, God. It's been a little while since I've taught. Does anybody remember what my last lesson was on? Anybody remember the book we were in? 1 Samuel. Does anybody remember what chapter we're on? Between 5 and 7. Which is chapter 6. So we went over chapter 5 last time. I know it's been a little while, so if you don't mind, just if you got your Bible, turn over to 1 Samuel chapter 5. Skim over it real quick, because I like to always start off with a little recap or review of what we went over last time before we jump into chapter 6. So can anybody just holler a few highlights out from chapter 5? I think once you skim over it, you'll remember real quick. That's it. That's true. Dagon was having a difficult time. Who was Dagon, and what kind of difficult time was he having? All right. He says there's a false god, or the Philistines' god, and what happened? Fell over?
First time, they sent him back up.
What? Tell me more. Why did he fall over? Where was he at? What was going on?
Ark of the Covenant.
Ark of the Covenant was there. Why was the Ark of the Covenant anywhere close to Dagon?
Their temple, I guess their temple of worship there, whatever.
So Dagon was the Philistines' god. So the Philistines were in battle with the Israelites. Remember, the Israelites brought the ark in to battle thinking that they would win the battle because the ark was there. And they ended up losing the battle. And the Philistines stole the ark. And when they brought the ark into their land, they put it in the house of Dagon, which was like this stone statue of a god of theirs. And they came in the next morning, it was laying face down on the ground, right? And then what did they do? He said they set it back up. They come back the next day, and what happened? He fell back over again, but his head and arms were cut off, weren't they? And it fell right over the threshold, is what it said. And from that day forward, no one ever stepped on the threshold of the Dagon temple or whatever. But very good. That's an important part. What else happened in chapter 5? Sister Charlotte picked the easy one. Yes, absolutely. The emeralds, right? Yeah, oh yeah, we remember that. Which can be translated a couple different ways. Traditionally, I think, especially in our church, we consider it to be hemorrhoids, which we know of reason to believe that is if we get in later in chapter 6, we're going to learn about the golden mice and why, like what role would they play. And there's a lot of speculation out there that what the Philistines were dealing with was bubonic plague, which is carried by rats and stuff. And that would cause all kinds of the same conditions that they speak about. But in the Bible, it's called emerods, and traditionally we say that they're hemorrhoids. So anyway, so the Philistines, that city that the ark was in, everybody in that city got this curse, this plague, and it wasn't just an annoying illness, was it? It was killing folks, wasn't it? I mean, it was that bad. And it got so bad, what did they do? They wanted to get rid of it, so they moved it to another city, right? What happened in that city? Same thing. And they moved it again, same thing. And that's basically what happened in chapter 5. So having went over that, I've kind of been thinking all week about this, and I thought, as silly as that sounds, if you think about it, the Philistines did something wrong. They went and stole the ark, number one. I don't know, but you can think of the Egyptians, and they actually get brought up in chapter 6. But if you remember back in Egypt when the Israelites were in captivity there, God came in and brought some plagues, didn't he? And if you really think about it, you can see some similarities between the two stories. Because the Philistines, what did they do? They brought the ark into Dagon. They saw Dagon fall. I think that God gave them an opportunity to realize who he was, what was going on. He hadn't cursed them or had caused any harm to them at that point in time, but it was obvious who he was and that he was all-powerful. So they had two options at that point, right? What is something they could have done when they saw Dagon had fell on the floor twice before the ark? What could their attitude have been? I think we discussed that a little bit last time. What do you think the proper reaction would be? Yeah, to acknowledge that wasn't the real God, to acknowledge who the real God was. But what did they do? Did they do that? What did they do? They kind of made up reasons why maybe it wasn't a God. They kept the ark. They didn't do anything different. And then they got plagued or inflicted with these emerods. Now that's really what I want to get to real quick in chapter 5 is this recap, is what was their reaction when they got the emerods? First of all, was their heart hardened for them to not react with Dagon the way that we think that they should have? Their heart had to be hardened a little bit. Well, when they get inflicted with emerods, they immediately start thinking this is because of the ark. So what could their reaction have been there? They could have made things right, couldn't they? But they didn't. So their heart was hardened, wasn't it? And they decided to not do that. And I wanted to just point that out because when we go through when you do study about the plagues of Egypt, it talks about how he hardened Pharaoh's heart. And a lot of folks are always like, what exactly does that mean? And I think right here we're seeing what it is to harden your heart. It's kind of like maybe you know the right thing to do or you know what you need to do, but you go around the world to not do it. And people still do that today. Folks that are in sin, they will... you might remember back in the day when you were in sin. Was it enjoyable? Did you have a good life? Or did you experience a lot of pain and heartache and all the things that sin brings along with it? Did you immediately just go run into God, or did you, avoid it as much as you could? And I think that you can see where the Philistines just avoided the inevitable as much as they could. And so in order to do that, I feel like your heart has to be hardened. So instead of doing the right thing, they send it to another city. The same thing happens. Again, they decide they don't want to do anything about it. But eventually, the way God works, most of the time, is he's eventually going to whittle you down, and you're going to need some relief, right? And that is kind of where we enter into chapter 6. So in chapter 6, the first verse, it says, the ark of the Lord was in the country of the Philistines for 7 months. A lot happened in 7 months, right? It doesn't sound like, to me, 7 months doesn't sound like a whole lot. But when you have hemorrhoids, it's a long time. 7 months they were inflicted. 7 months they put up with this stuff. 7 months they didn't do the right thing. They just kept trying to get around it, kept trying to not admit maybe that they had done wrong and taken the ark. So in verse 2, and the Philistines called for the priests and the diviners, saying, what shall we do to the ark of the Lord? And I like that. If I was to say, what's the story about the ark here? You would tell me, well, they got hemorrhoids, and they decided we have had enough of this. We need to send this ark back to Israel. But if you read the scripture here, it doesn't say the Philistines said, hey, we need to send this thing back to Israel. They actually called their priests, their diviners, and said, what do we need to do with this thing? Right? That wasn't their first reaction, is to get this back to Israel. They said, what are we going to do with this thing? We've done everything with it that we can. We've sent it several cities. What shall we do to the ark of the Lord? Tell us wherewith we shall send it to this place. Or tell us wherewith we shall send it to his place. And so I've got some notes written here. It said, finally, number one, that they'd had enough. And eventually we all get to the point where we've had enough, and we're going to do whatever it takes to get some relief, even if it means righting the wrong that we've committed. Can anybody remember how many cities they sent it to? I know in the scripture it speaks of 3 different cities that it went to. They kept it for 7 months, refusing to admit that it was a mistake to have taken it. And then I always take this type of thing and I try to compare it to ourselves, which I've kind of already brought up, but can you compare that to yourself or other people where you've done wrong and you just beat around the bush instead of just making it right? And it usually makes things worse. In verse 3, they said, if ye send away the ark of the God of Israel, don't send it away empty, but in any wise return him a trespass offering. Now these are the priests and the diviners talking. But in any wise return him a trespass offering, then ye shall be healed, and it shall be known to you why his hand is not removed from you. We see the priests and diviners already acknowledging God here, right? Acknowledging who God is by saying we need to create a trespass offering for this God. They also begin to have a real respect for God. When Dagon fell on his face, that wasn't enough to seem to give them enough respect. But 7 months of hemorrhoids seems to have brought about some respect. Then said they, what shall be the trespass offering which we shall return to him? And I've studied this and I really feel like when they asked this question, it wasn't, oh, that's a good idea, priests and diviners. What kind of trespass offering should we send? I think they said, you need to send the ark back to Israel. Not only do you need to send it back, you need to send it back with an offering too. And those people, those lords of the Philistines were like, I think they were disgusted with that idea, number one, and I think they were more like, well, what kind of trespass offering do we need to send? I really believe that's why. That's what kind of their attitude, and I'll tell you why here in a minute. So what kind of trespass offering do we need to return to him? And they said you need to make 5 golden emerods and 5 golden mice. And their reasoning was because it was the number of the lords of the Philistines, and wanted one for one plague was on you all and on the lords. Wherefore you shall make images of your emerods. Do some good sculptors in the land, I'm sure. And images of your mice that mar the land, and ye shall give glory unto the God of Israel. Do you hear that? Who said that? The priests and the diviners of the Philistines said, you need to give glory unto this God of Israel. Peradventure he will lighten his hand from off you and from off your gods and from off your land. They still acknowledge their own gods, but they have acknowledged that God of Israel, and that the God of Israel is more powerful maybe than their gods. He's in control of their gods, their land. It's just very interesting the way that they talk about God here. God's made a believer out of them, it looks like to me. notice they come up with this great idea to create 5 golden emerods and 5 golden mice. And we know the emerods, and I've already spoke to the mice a little bit. What do you think about the 5 mice?
Well, that makes me think what you said about the connection between the two
Yeah.
being probable.
Yeah, I thought so too. As I started doing my research, it makes a lot of sense that you have this tremendous sickness. Like, we're in the middle of a pandemic now, but imagine, I won't make light of our pandemic, but imagine you catch what they got, being like the Black Death or the bubonic plague, where you are just, it's certain death when you get this. Thousands and thousands of people are catching it quickly, and they might have been smart enough, I don't know why they wouldn't have been, to figure out that, I know the last one that we had hundreds of years ago, it was spread by rats as a fly or a flea that's on the rat, and they were able to figure that out eventually, but they could have easily figured that out too. I don't know what the illness was. I don't know how it was spread, but I really feel like whatever the illness was tremendously bad and was very possibly spread by mice or by rats. And so in their mind, that this is my illness and all these rats seem to be carrying it around. That's not to say that God's not causing it. That's just the medium in which God used to get it around to everybody. And that seems to make a lot of sense to me. I don't have all the answers, but that's just what makes sense to me, is that the mice had something to do with how this got around and infecting everybody. And they were obviously a tremendous problem for them to decide that that was one of the golden items they needed to make. And then in verse 6, the priests and diviners say something else very interesting, right? And this is why I think their question was, what kind of trespass offering do we need to get? Because then they say, wherefore do you harden your hearts? Why have you hardened your hearts, or why are you hardening your hearts right now? And you're doing it just like the Egyptians and Pharaoh hardened their hearts. When he had wrought wonderfully among them, did they not let the people go and they departed? And to me, that just speaks a lot. Number one, the priests and diviners seem to be pretty wise people, number one. But they reference what happened with the Egyptians and Pharaohs, and he's basically saying, you guys are acting just like them, and it didn't turn out too good for them. And in the end, no matter how hard they fought, no matter how stubborn they were, no matter how prideful they were, the Israelites were let go. And that's inevitable, and that's what's going to happen here. So it would be wise for you not to harden your heart the way they did. So there's a lesson there, obviously. But what speaks to me more than that is like, here's a whole group of people that aren't Israelites a long time after the Exodus happened, and these people know what happened in Egypt. They know what happened to Pharaoh. They know what happened to the Israelites. They know it well. Like, they're referencing the hardening of the heart and all that type of stuff. And when I do a study, and I do lessons and stuff from Exodus or go through Exodus with classes, that's one thing I continually try to bring up is, he didn't have to do all these plagues, and he didn't have to do it the way he did it. And he had to send Moses knowing that Pharaoh wasn't going to do it. And really, the Bible said God hardened Pharaoh's heart. He didn't have to do that. And so the question is a lot of times like, why did he choose to do it that way? And my answer is always like, because God wanted everybody to know that God did this. God was in control. Pharaoh didn't make this decision. The Israelites didn't fight their own way out of Egypt. Undeniably, for sure, there is a God up there that did these things. And it worked, because hundreds of years later, of a group of people that aren't even in Israel, aren't Egyptians, know exactly what happened, how powerful it was, and are actually referencing and making decisions on their actions based on that. Like, they're saying, oh, we don't need to do that. Remember what happened in Egypt. And that's why God did the plagues and did what he did in Exodus the way that he did it, because it spoke volumes and people knew who he was and the kind of power that he had. And so that verse really speaks to me in that way.
I like to draw a parallel
Mm-hmm.
But you see hundreds of years there, that history was passed down even among the heathen.
Yeah, even among the heathen. That's exactly right.
Okay. What's happening in our society today?
Mm-hmm.
Our young kids don't know it's American history.
Yeah.
It's not being passed down. It's been watered down. So why are young kids and even some of us, even generation after me, your generation don't know history like they should know.
Mm-mm.
And that gets you in trouble when we face our crisis that we're in today.
I believe you're right on. I mean, I think history is super important. I personally am a guy that enjoys history. I think it's interesting, but my goodness, you don't know where to go if you don't know where you've been.
You know, our kids are, you know what kind of history they're getting right now? History about Karl Marx,
Mm-hmm.
all those that's taking our country to communism.
Yeah.
That's what we're
Yeah.
kids is picking up on.
It's something to think about, and it's something to be careful of.
And our forefathers, Washington, Thomas Jefferson, all of them are the evil guys. And,
Right.
Warp history of ours. So
Exactly.
It just amazes me since you brought that up hundreds of years after Egyptian, but yet even the heathen knew that God, the God of Israel, was there, and they knew so much that they knew that God hardened Pharaoh's heart.
Right. Yeah, and not only do you not really kind of know where to go if you don't know where you've been, but you're doomed to repeat all the mistakes you made if you don't know your history. So that's something that bothers me when I see the country doing things like tearing statues down and stuff. It's not it's not something I want to get into as far as how it makes me feel, but just the bottom line is it's like they're trying to erase history. And you don't want to forget what happened. Whether it was good or bad, you don't want to forget about that. Everybody needs to know all these different things. You learn from it.
And you learn to do better.
Right. And you're exactly right. And it's a great example that you're bringing up, because even the heathen knew about the Egyptians all that time, and the only way they would have known about it is it being passed down and people sharing that history. And to be honest with you, I think that we're in pretty poor shape in the nation as far as teaching history, for sure, and it seems to be getting worse. But at the same time, that just puts the responsibility on us and our own parents and grandparents even more to make sure kids do know that. It's not hopeless if our schools aren't teaching the history like we want, or our government is doing a certain way. We still can sit down and teach this history, and I'm sure a lot of this was taught that way in homes with the Philistines back in those times, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just I've always feel that responsibility anyway, but I feel it even greater if they're not going to school and getting that type of thing, that I need to do that.
The children of Israel with their history, I mean, even the children of Israel, the Jewish people, still knows their history,
Mm-hmm.
and they honor the feast of all their feasts still even today. If that hadn't been passed down, they would have forgot it.
Right. And the people that are bringing this up too in here, don't forget, I keep bringing it up, is they called priests and diviners. I don't know what kind of priests and diviners the Philistines had, but these were obviously a select group of men, or I guess they were men. And so what I'm getting at is they knew God, they knew what happened in Egypt. So you would think the Philistines knew exactly what they were getting into when they took the ark, because they knew the history of God. But I don't know that the general population of the Philistines really knew, or I won't say knew, but respected God, really knew who God was. And God introduced himself to them. And then the wiser people kind of came on the scene and was like, look, y'all aren't thinking about your history. Remember who this God is and what he can do.
And it could have been these false gods is under the influence of Satan, and Satan knows exactly who God is because he was in heaven with him.
It's true, yeah.
So Satan could have gave them. Satan could have even gave them that knowledge.
Yeah.
And because you got an example even in the New Testament where Jesus traveling, and he's come up on where he cast the demons out of the out
Swine.
in the tombs maybe. But anyway, they said, you know, are you going to deal with us before our time? So
Right,
they
yeah.
knew they got a time coming.
Mm-hmm.
So what did he do? He said, you know, let us go into those swine. So he let them go into the swine. They was cast and went over, and all the swine died.
Yeah.
But so there's a knowledge between God and devil and our enemy, the Satan. And so, you know, and then another place, you know, where one of, you know, it said, you say you believe, said, well, even the devils believe and
Tremble. That's right. That's right.
So,
Some really good points. Something to be thinking about for sure.
I didn't mean to get off the subject.
Oh,
it was off subject.
No, it was great.
Just,
It's great. We're at verse 6, so when we get to verse 7, it's kind of a turning point. So it talks about milk kine in this next verse. I wanted to find out, we got some old timers in here, right? I wanted to find out if anybody in here ever raised cattle or milk cows or any kind of cattle. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, few people. I did, believe it or not. I was one of the guys that got up before school every morning in the dark and went and got a cow and milked a cow before school every day. Believe it or not. And it's why I don't own cows today. When I was growing up, I made a promise to myself that I was never going to raise cows because rain or snow, it didn't matter. So, reading through this, I don't know if y'all have ever paid much attention to what we're about to read through, but I wanted to break a lot of it down because it means a lot if you really pick up on all the stuff that's going on. So, first of all, when they talk about kine in the Bible, if you look up the translation for that word, it's just literally cow or heifer. Now, what is a cow or heifer? Those that raise cattle. Heifer's a young cow, female that has never dropped a calf. A cow is usually what we just use generally for anything, but really a cow is a female cow that has dropped a calf before. It's given suck, or its calf is still sucking milk, right? And then we would call a bull the male side of that. So the kine actually doesn't just translate to cow, it translates specifically to female cow. The milch word in this next verse, milk, actually is milk. It means that cow is giving suck. It's got a calf that has not been weaned yet. So anybody that's raised cattle ever had a cow that had a new calf? Yeah, and did they act a certain way? If you tried to take their calf from them? Pretty protective. I mean, we had to do it a lot too when, but they get pretty concerned, I guess is what I'm getting at. I've never had one like attack me because of the calf, but if I got her calf away from her, her eyes are big, she's what the Bible calls lowing, right? Looking around for that calf, and she's trying to find it. She's very, very concerned, and she's not going anywhere. She's going to try to track that calf down, figure out what's going on, even if I, for whatever reason, had to take her calf, take it in the barn somewhere, maybe give it a shot, whatever it had to do. If it's out of her sight, she's in a fence, she's going to be at the fence, waiting, getting as close as she can. Her eyes are going to be about that big around, and she's going to be waiting to see if she can find that calf. So that's to give you the personality of a female cow that's got a new calf, to set the stage. Next in this verse, I guess we could read the verse. Now therefore make a new cart, take 2 milk kine, on which there hath come no yoke, and tie the kine to the cart, and bring their calves home from them. So then it talks about the yoke. Now, I'm not familiar with the yoke. I've never had horses. I've never driven oxen. I've never done anything where I had to yoke animals together. Has anybody in here ever yoked animals together? Really? I thought maybe there'd be 1 or 2. Well, does anybody know how it's done? What a yoke is? goes around her neck, and usually it's to yoke two together. So if I have it correct, a lot of times you might see them hanging on the walls of old restaurants or something, right? It hangs around their neck, and then there's a rod that goes between the two, and it keeps them from being able to move closer together or further apart. So it keeps them kind of as a team, I suppose. Now, I don't know about y'all's cows or cattle, but I could just imagine slipping a yoke over one of my milk cows and tying it to a cart. What would happen? What do y'all think? Could you imagine doing that to any of your cows or cattle, what they would do?
Yeah, they're going to have to be trained first.
They're definitely going to have to be trained if you're wanting them to do anything with that cart. Mine would have probably looked at me like I was an idiot, took its first step and realized that cart was behind her and would have took off. And the cart would have probably been in pieces really quick. Imagine taking two of them and trying to tie them together and doing that. I can't imagine what would happen. The point here is the verse is saying they've never been yoked, and that's a tremendously big deal. Because if you're going to have any kind of cattle or oxen or anything that's going to yoke together to do a task, they've got to be specifically trained to do that, right? Has anybody in here ever trained horses to pull something? Maybe. No? Okay. It takes some time. You got to train them to do that. They have to learn to do that. And then, not only that, but you'll notice at the end of that scripture it says, bring their calves home from them, meaning separate the calves from the cows. The Philistines are trying to set up the absolute worst conditions for these cows possible. They're trying to stack the deck against God, so to speak. Let's find out why. In verse 8, and take the ark of the Lord and lay it upon the cart, put the jewels of gold, which ye return him for a trespass offering, in a coffer by the side thereof. Send it away that it may go. And see if it goeth up by the way of his own coast to Bethshemesh, then he hath done us this great evil. But if not, then we shall know that it is not his hand that smote us. It was a chance that happened to us. Even back in this day, people were still going, is this God? I don't know. We need a way to prove it. Do y'all ever do that today? Y'all ever been like, I really feel like I want to do this, but I don't know if it's God or if it's just me. Right? Me too. Right.
I find it interesting here that they say that if the cart goes this way, then we know it was God of Israel that has done this. But if it doesn't, then it's by chance.
By
They
chance.
weren't even trying to attribute this to any other God.
That's a really good point. I hadn't really thought about it, but you're right. I wonder if it was too great to be another God or something. It's interesting. That was their plan. That's what's going on here. These wise men, priests, diviners, they are basically saying, we need a way to know if this is really God or not. And I got a good idea. Let's put this ark on a cart. And to pull this cart, we're going to get the two most terrible cows you could possibly find and tie to this cart. Go get 2 cows, make sure they've got fresh young calves that they don't want to be separated from. Make sure they've never pulled anything in their life. They've never even been yoked to another cow before. And we're going to yoke them, and we're going to just tie them up to this cart. We're not going to have anybody on there driving them. We're just going to tie them up. We're going to put the ark on there. And then if they randomly, this city like Beth Shemesh is 10 miles away from my research. So for 10 miles, we're just going to let them go. It's a miracle if they even went anywhere. But where do you think a cow that's separated from their calf is going to want to go? Their eyes are this big around. They know where that calf is at. If you took them and put them in the barn 100 yards away, they're going over there as soon as you let them. That's what's on the minds of these cows. So it's impossible that these cows are going to function as a team enough to even pull a cart, much less that they're going to go anywhere but where their calves are at, much less randomly 10 miles away. And so that's what the Philistines did. So they stacked the deck against God, basically. And they said, now if they go 10 miles and get to this city, then we'll know it's God. If they don't, we'll just consider it to be in chance that this happened to us. And I still see that today. Can anybody think of anything else in the Bible where you see this? There's another man I think of that did the same thing. Like, well, if this is God, I want to prove that it's God. Anybody think of anybody else in the Bible that did that? I feel like I do this a lot. I feel like I doubt that it's God, or even when something good happens, we want to attribute it to God, but in the back of our mind sometimes, maybe we'll be like, well, I don't know if that was God or not. Maybe that just happened. Or where I really feel it a lot, and a lot of you too, a lot of you also may feel it a lot, is when you feel led to do something. Maybe you feel led to worship a certain way. You feel led to say something. You feel led to whatever, but you might be embarrassed. In those times, I think we go, well, if I was sure it was God, I'd do it for sure. But I don't want it to be just me. And so you start questioning, is this God or not? Which is very similar to what's happening here. Anybody think of a guy that did this? He's who I always think of when I'm going through this. Say it out loud. What did she say? Gideon, that's the one. What did he do? The fleece. Can anybody even remember what he was questioning? I believe it was when he was about to go out and fight a battle. Yeah, and he was like, well, now, God, you really want me to do this? I need to prove that. So what did he do with he took a fleece, like sheep's fleece, I guess. What did he do with it? It's a pretty cool story. I know y'all are going to be like, I don't remember which one happened first. It's okay if you get it wrong. I'm not going to think any less of you. Something about the dew. So what did he do? Remind me. Sorry. Right. So one night it needed to be dry, one night it needed to be wet. Yeah, for some reason I'm having a tough time remembering which one happened first or even exactly how it went, but something along the lines of maybe he, I don't know if he soaked the fleece before and laid it outside, and the next morning got up and it was dry, even though the dew had fell on it. And then the next night he was like, okay, well, I'm going to lay it out here dry, and if I wake up in the morning and it's soaking wet, then... But the funny part is he didn't really need to question God to begin with, but he was like, all right, God, I want to know it to you. I'm going to soak this fleece, and I'm going to set it outside and put it, in the yard or whatever. If I wake up in the morning and it's dry, or maybe it was the opposite way the first time, I'll know it's you. Well, it happened. And then he was like, well, let's do this again, God. And he did it in reverse, and it happened. I always think of that, because if Gideon had that trouble, maybe I'm not such a bad person when I question it sometimes. But we see the same thing happening here with the Philistines. So let's find out what happened. The men did so. Verse 10, they took 2 milk kine, tied them to the cart, shut up their calves at home, and they laid the ark of the Lord upon the cart, and the coffer with the mice of gold, and the images of their emerods. And the kine took the straight way to the way of Bethshemesh, went along the highway, lowing as they went, and turned not aside to the right or to the left. That's amazing. That's amazing what has happened right there. Spirit-led cows. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it, right? They went straight. There wasn't a pause. They weren't trying to figure it out. They didn't have to lead them. They didn't have to get them in the right direction. God said go, and those cows took off and went straight to the city. It said they went straight to the city. They went straight on the highway. They were lowing as as they went, which I thought was interesting because I feel like they're probably lowing because their calves are gone. So in their minds, they still know their calves are gone. They're concerned, but something is not allowing them to turn around and go after their calf. I don't even think the cow understands what's going on. And not only that, but it said they did not even turn to the right or the left. They didn't get off track a little bit. They didn't stutter. They didn't misstep. They just went straight on to the city. So I hope, after explaining everything about these cows, you understand just how miraculous it is that happened. It had been pretty miraculous if it had just been regular cows that had done it every day, that they just went straight to the city for 10 miles without any help. But for these, it's amazing they went 1 foot.
It was completely contrary to their nature.
Yeah.
At that point, because most cows, they basically got their calves back. Once man can get their hands off of them, they're gonna take off their calves.
That's it. As soon as you let go of those cows, they're going to try to go separate ways and go find those cows, and it would have been a disaster. And
There's the power of God in this also, though, that Scripture says that as they went lowing,
mm-hmm.
as what you said before of what a cow will do when you take the calf away.
Mm-hmm.
And though they even doing that, they still
Exactly.
went anyway. Even though they were grieving the loss of that calf,
Mm-hmm.
they still went.
And I love how you're bringing that up. And really, there's a lot more deep stuff that you could pull out of that verse that we could spend a lot of time on. But I mean, I can see that in myself sometimes. Whenever grieving is a great word that you use, but you could be going through something, but God's still driving you forward. You can be going through things and still under the Spirit be able to go forward, still be able to do things. God still can lead you. Sometimes I don't know about y'all, but sometimes I get through life, I don't even know how I'm doing it. It's almost like He's in control and I'm just getting pushed along by Him. So yes, that's exactly what's going on with these cows. In 13 it said, and they of Beth-Shemesh were reaping their wheat harvest in the valley. I don't know how they reaped wheat over there at this day and time, but when I think of it, I think of one of those big old, what do they call those? Is it a sickle or I don't know what they call it, that big round blade, and they're out there cutting down wheat, baling it up. And they lifted up their eyes, and it says they were in this valley, and it's not like a small valley. I'm sure it's a big, huge valley. They're out there in the field. They look up, and here comes these cows pulling this cart, and it's got the ark on it. So they lifted up their eyes. They saw the ark, and they rejoiced. Remember how upset they were when it got stole a few chapters ago? So imagine how happy they are to see it coming back. And the cart came into the field of Joshua, a Beth-Shemite, and stood there, where there was a great stone. And they clave the wood of the cart and offered the kine, a burnt offering unto the Lord. So not only did they do all this and they go the 10 miles, but they knew right where to go. And when they got there, they just stopped. Like, their job was done. They went exactly where God wanted them to go. And the Israel... I don't know why, I don't know if it's humorous or what, but the first thing I was like, yeah, we got the ark back. Let's tear this cart apart, build a fire, and burn these cows. It's like, man, these cows are pretty cool. Let's let them go back to their calves. But they tear apart the wood of the cart, and they use that, I guess, to build a fire, and then they burn the kine as an offering to the Lord. And the Levites, we know who they are. Right? Tribe of Levi, they're the ones that are the priests. They're the ones allowed to deal with the ark. And the Levites took down the ark of the Lord and the coffer that was with it, wherein the jewels of gold were, and put them on the great stone. And the men of Beth-Shemesh offered burnt offerings and sacrifices the same day unto the Lord. And when the 5 lords of the Philistines saw it, remember the lords followed that cart at a distance back to the city. I don't think they got very close. I just think they were there long enough to see that it actually went. So they might have been like the top of a hill somewhere watching all this. When they saw it, they returned back to Ekron the same day. And these are the golden emerods which the Philistines returned for a trespass offering unto the Lord. One was for Ashdod, one for Gaza, one for Askelon, one for Gath, and one for Ekron. These are cities. 3 of these are the ones mentioned in the last chapter. The golden mice, according to the number of all the cities of the Philistines belonging to the 5 lords, both of fenced cities and country villages, even unto the great stone of Abel, whereon they set down the ark of the Lord, which stone remaineth unto this day in the field of Joshua the Bethshemite. And then in verse 19, something crazy happens, right? It said, he smote the men of Bethshemesh, because they had looked into the ark of the Lord. Even he smote of the people 50,000 and 60 men, and the people lamented, because the Lord had smitten many of the people with a great slaughter. I've come across stuff like this, and I'm like, man, that took a turn really quick. And it doesn't really talk about them looking into the ark, right? Usually they would be like, and so came up and looked into the ark or whatever. But it just out of the blue says a whole bunch of people died because they looked in the ark. If you do a lot of research on this verse, I'm just trying to understand some history behind it. There's several ways to translate this too. The easiest one is just to say that he killed 50,070 men in Bethshemesh. But the way I understand it, that'd be a lot of men in that city. And that's a lot of men to look into the ark. A lot of folks, when you translate this stuff, it talks about that it really should translate like he smote of the people, or of 50,000, he smote 70 men, is what a lot of folks say. That's really the way that it should be translated. Some people even stretch it a little bit and say that 70 men in Bethshemesh were smote, but maybe 50,000 were how many Philistines got smote. I don't know. I don't really read it that way. So it's either 50,000 and 70 men in Bethshemesh, or of 50,000 men, 70 got smote. Either way, a bunch of people got killed for looking into the ark. Did you know that you weren't supposed to do that? What's in the ark to look at? Some manna, Aaron's rod, and 10 commandments, which would be pretty cool to see. It'd be pretty cool to see, Keisha. I'd want to look into it. So I don't know the story. I don't know what happened. I don't know why people were looking into it. It starts off good. The Levites showed up. You know, the guys that were supposed to, they seemed to know how to handle the ark, but somehow a bunch of people ended up looking into it. And so a bunch of people died. And really the point of that's not so much of why did they die and how many died, but it's the next verse. Because it said, because of that happening, the men at Bethshemesh said, who is able to stand before this holy Lord? And to whom shall he go up from us? It's almost like they had the same predicament the Philistines had. We can't handle this. We're dying because of this ark. Who can stand before this ark? Who can live in a city where this ark is at? Who can stand before this holy God? We need to get this thing out of here. And so they sent messengers to the inhabitants of Kirath-Jearim, saying, the Philistines have brought again the ark of the Lord. Come ye down, fetch it up to you. Does that city sound familiar to anybody? Kirath-Jearim. It's an important one. But if you go all the way to 2 Samuel, David becomes king, and David decides one day, hey, I want the ark back here at Jerusalem. He goes to Kirath-Jearim to get it. So this is how the ark got there. And the next time you see it get gotten, it's David coming to get it. And it's still there. So I just want to point that out. Going back a verse, though, in 20, and we'll kind of conclude with this. The men of Bethshemesh said, who is able to stand before this holy Lord God? Why didn't they just say Lord God? Why did they put in the word holy here when it pertained to 50,000 men dying? Are they saying that God is too hard? I think of it as God is God. And if God said, if you look into the ark, you're going to die, He's a holy God, meaning that if you look into the ark, you're going to die. And there is no, well, I really feel bad for you today, so you're not going to die.
They wasn't even supposed to touch the ark
Right.
with physical hands.
Mm-hmm.
So they went too far just touching it.
We think of God, we think of grace and mercy, and that's good. I think we need to think of that stuff. But we also need to understand His holiness too, and who He is. And if God says something, that is what it's going to be. It's not that He's mean. It's not that He doesn't like you. It's just that's the way it is. That's what makes it holy. So whether He likes it or not, you're going to die if you do something He says is going to kill you. If He speaks something, that's just the way it is. And that's like the guy that touched it on the way back with David. He died. We could sit there all day and make that's not fair. Or, he was doing the best. It doesn't matter. It's a holy God. And when He says that's how it is, that's how it is. And so I think that's what's happening here. Maybe when the ark, we already know Israel was kind of getting out there anyway. That's why the ark got stole. They didn't have very good priests in charge. Now the ark's been gone for 7 months. I don't know what their attitude or mindset was at the time. I know that they were very, very grievous when the ark got stole. How long did that last? A month? 2 months? At what point did they finally say, well, it's gone. We might as well just get on with life. It's over. God's not with us anymore. And they just move on. And by 7 months later, maybe they just took for granted the ark, forgot God's holiness. I don't know. And when it comes back, everybody's clamoring over it. Maybe everybody's piling all over the ark trying to get to touch it. And we're so glad it's back. And open that thing up, and they're just like, they forget the holiness of God. And then all of a sudden everybody dies. And they remember real quick. And they're like, man, this God doesn't have any bend in Him. Who can stand before this holy Lord God? And I think of that. That's the kind of God they had to deal with in the Old Testament. It's the same God we deal with today.
In the Old Testament, he took drastic measures to get their attention.
Oh yeah.
And now we wonder, I think because we're in the grace dispensation, we don't see that.
Right. That's what I was about to say. Like, that's the same God we serve today. And so again, I don't know how many times I've already said this in some of my lessons. Every day, you need to thank God for His Son because of the grace and the mercy that comes with that. This is the God you serve, a holy God. But because of Christ, we have a grace they didn't have back then. We have a grace that we take for granted, and we probably don't fully appreciate every day like we should, but that is what is so special about Christ, what He brought to the table and what He did for us. When that grace is gone, you're going to see this same type of holiness, holy God, do these type things again. And you don't want to be here for that. You don't want to be a part of that. Take advantage of grace, but don't ever lose your appreciation for it. And I also wanted to put in here, and that's my last part, is I asked, is God too hard? Is that what they're asking? They're like, this God is too hard. Who can stand before Him? But is it that God's too hard, or is it that they were too disobedient? And that's a good question. And if you ever think...
That was their problem all along. I mean, God promised them blessings on blessings on blessings on blessings if they would follow Him.
And disobedience got them. If you ever feel like in your life, and I know I have, if you ever feel like God's too hard, God's too holy, God's too hard, or whatever, God's not fair, remember this, and you might think, maybe I'm just not obedient enough. Maybe I'm too disobedient. Maybe it's not God. Maybe it's me. Maybe God's not too hard. That is the last verse. I would love to hear any other comments anybody might have, any thoughts that...
Brother Steve, thinking about how God is in control and God knows all things. When Balaam was beating on that donkey, the donkey thought, I think about all this I can say. And God said, well, tell him.
Yeah.
And He told him. And when the widow was baking the cakes, Elijah was sitting over there, and the raven probably thought, well, I don't even like to be around people, but I'm taking this man
That's a good point.
He controlled those cows, made them leave their nature. And sometimes he tells us how to leave our nature and take on his.
Mm-hmm.
But we must listen.
We must listen. I think that's the truth.
Day right now, we must listen.
Mm-hmm. I know that we're different from animals, right? And a lot of folks try to tell us that we're not, and we're built so similar or whatever, but there's definitely something different about us. And in some ways, I kind of look up to them, because if we didn't have freedom of choice, we would be robots, right? We would just do whatever we were programmed to do. And really and truly, I think that's what animals do, right? They just do what they're programmed to do. I don't know that they have the freedom of choice. I don't think they have the consciousness enough to even realize that. But at the same time, that means these animals just do what they do, right? The Bible tells us all kinds of stuff, like how the birds build their nests and how they don't worry for anything, and they just get up in the morning and they do exactly what they're supposed to do every day. You know, they sing their song, they make their nest, they do whatever it is they're supposed to do. They don't learn things and build big houses and try to figure out how to make money. They just do what they do. Every animal seems to do that, and it's kind of like, to me, it's almost like a really good way of seeing God's glory just in nature. And sometimes I'm like, I wish I had enough where I just did what God wanted me to do, and like these cows is a good example. With the cows, he just make them do it, but with us, does he just make us do it while we're lowing and fighting him, or does he give us the opportunity to do it, give us the leading to do it, but he still ultimately leaves it up to us to walk down that road and follow him, right? And I think there's a big difference there. And that way the cattle kind of have an advantage, but I still think we have the freedom of choice whether we're going to follow what we feel inside to do. But if we'll do it, it'll turn out just like it did with them. We'll end up right where we're supposed to be. So it's a good lesson tonight, a good chapter. Anything else y'all can think of or want to say or bring up?
And on the other hand, people do not realize the power of Satan. Once you yield your body to Satan, the homosexual field, a healthy man that's raised children, all of a sudden was burned within his heart. That's Satan.
Mm-hmm.
Or vice versa. So, while God has power, don't underestimate the power of Satan. Once you yield to Satan, you become under the control of Satan.
It's true. I think you're in danger of that as long as you live in a flesh body in this world. It's something that you've got to take very seriously.
That's why it's so important to keep God first.
That's right. That is right. Are there any announcements or anything anyone needs to make before we dismiss? I've got it on my calendar to teach next Wednesday. I don't know if I am or not. I think I am. I've got it on my calendar for some reason. If I am teaching next Wednesday, it'll be in the next chapter. So if y'all want to cheat and read ahead a little bit, that would be great. It should be chapter 7. If there's nothing else, then you are dismissed. Appreciate everybody coming out tonight. I really enjoyed it.